All right. Good morning and welcome to day 2 of the Ohio Local History Alliance virtual conference. We are starting out today with a joint session, Achieving Inclusion Through Community Engagement, 2 case studies from Northeast Ohio, the Lorain Historical Society and the Trumbull County Historical Society, and various presenters thereof. So a couple of housekeeping notes that by this point in the conference you're all pretty much familiar with, but this is a webinar. So the sessions and chat activity are being recorded. Use chat and select all panelists and attendees to share comments, responses to questions, and share resources. Chat with each other. Please submit all questions for the presenters through the Q&A. It makes it much easier for us to keep track of the questions and answers and make sure that we're finding them along the way for the moderator. I am now going to turn it over to Rebecca Urban from the Peninsula Society, who is our moderator for today's session.
All right. Welcome and good morning, everyone. As Betsy said, if you are in Achieving Inclusion Through Community Engagement, you are in the right place. My name is Rebecca Urban. I'm the administrator for the Peninsula Foundation and in Region 3 for OLHA. I'm also the secretary. We've got 4 presenters today. We've got from the Lorain Historical Society. We have Barbara Piscopo, who's the executive director, Kaitlyn Donaldson, the collections supervisor, and Maria Carrion, who is a board member. And from Trumbull County Historical Society, we have Sarah Moell, who is the curator of collections and research. So without further ado, I will turn it over to our presenters. Go ahead, Kaitlyn.
Okay, let me turn it over to Barb.
Good morning. You're going to hear first from Barb Piscopo. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the origin of this project, and then we're going to turn it over to Kaitlyn and Maria so that we can give you a full idea of how the project developed. It was extremely organic, and I think that is really an amazing part of this project. It really started with a question and has really developed and emerged based on the collaborators as part of it. So just one point besides myself and Kaitlyn, who's curator here at the Lorain Historical Society, Maria is kind of carrying a dual role. She is a member of our board of trustees, but she also works at El Centro. El Centro is one of our partner agencies in this project and really a key partner along with Oberlin College. Particularly 2 professors at Oberlin, Gina Perez and Pablo Mitchell, who have worked with us over the course of the year to develop the project. The city of Lorain, like many communities in Ohio and in Northeast Ohio, once was a large industrial city. We had steel production, we had shipbuilding, and we had the auto industry with Ford here in Lorain. And our city is probably geographically the largest city in Lorain County. And we're located right on Lake Erie with the Black River that you see pictured in the slide, going all the way to the steel plant up the Black River. This community was built on immigrants coming here from everywhere in Europe, in Latin America, in just every community to find work. And we had plenty of opportunity for that. People could get a really good paying job and not speak much English. And if they were willing to work hard, they could support their family. And that was incredible. In 1947, US Steel was looking for laborers. And so they actually went to Puerto Rico and recruited 500 Puerto Rican men to come to Lorain to work at the steel mill. The Mexican community is the other Hispanic community that's larger in population. They came around the 1920s. They came up from Mexico, also from Texas, and came here to work at any of the industries here, Ford, ship, etc. So those are the two predominant Hispanic groups that are part of Lorain, but we also have people from the Dominican Republic, people from Cuba who came to escape Fidel Castro, and they chose Lorain because there was work here. And here are some pictures that we have of some of the Puerto Rican men who were recruited initially in '47 to work in the steel mill. When we were doing our permanent exhibits, we realized how, I don't even want to use the word incomplete, how totally lacking our collection was, especially our photograph and archival collection was, about the history of both the Latino community and the African American community. And so I approached Victor Leandri, who is the executive director of El Centro, and I said, how can we work together to collect this history? And that's really the beginning of this project. And he, through his influence and leadership, got some staff members, Maria being one of them, and also the professors at Oberlin College who had been doing research here in Lorain to get the ball rolling. And we have since developed into quite an amazing steering committee and a large group effort.
So, hello. So one of our first meetings that we had with, where we invited the Latino community to participate, we explained our goals for our project, but opened it up with these brainstorming questions. So one, what do you remember that's already been done and by whom? And by that we mean, there have been multiple, there's been many people who've documented the Latino community in Lorain. They've written college theses, or there's documentaries, or there's books that have been written. So what do you know that's already been done? And so we broke everybody into groups, and then they brainstormed what they knew. Then what or how do you envision this project could look like? What should we collect? So we didn't come into the program knowing exactly what we wanted this to look like. We really left it up to the community, and we had some great ideas that came from that. And then finally, what individual or group is missing from this meeting that we can collaborate with? So we just jotted down names of who's not here, groups that aren't here, and it helped expand and grow the group. At our second large group meeting, we did a timeline activity where we wrote out a large strip of paper. We wrote down different decades, and then again, we broke everybody into groups and asked them to answer 3 basic questions. List names of individuals from the Latino community that should be known or remembered. Any arts, sports, or music groups that have existed in Lorain, and then what Latino businesses and organizations have existed. And then we did our best to try and place those Post-it notes by decade. And it was really revealing to show what times in history the community knew a lot. And then, for example, in 1930, we didn't have any Post-it notes. It shows where the gaps in our knowledge, and it kind of reaffirmed how important this project is, because we are losing history as the further we get away from documenting this. One of the questions from the first meeting was, what did you want this project to look like? So that's where we got ideas for a physical museum, or an online museum, or an archive, or an exhibit, or a building, some sort of place where we could go, people could go to see and learn and share with the community what has happened in Lorain. Oral history interviews were very popular. The Latino community has been documented sporadically through oral history, so we just wanted a more organized collection or a program involving those. And to get started with collecting, we started a Google Drive. So I'll share that. Right now, there's so many more steps involved in creating an online archive, and we also don't have the funds to have a whole building at the moment. So we started with an online archive as a goal, And to get there, there's so much involved in tracking donations, cataloging items, and what program do you use to organize everything so that it's researcher friendly, and so that we can start collecting things and getting ready to make them a forward-facing online archive. So we just started with a Google Drive. We're very early in this process, but we just wanted to see how much at the Lorain Historical Society we had, and how much between El Centro and Oberlin College, that we could just start to see how much, and it revealed we have so much in the community. And at one of our early meetings, a professor from Oberlin College, Professor Perez, she attended and shared with us that she has been teaching an oral history class for 2 or 3 semesters at Oberlin College, where they have been documenting the Latino community in Lorain County, and it had already been happening for a couple years. So she attended, and we started aligning our group with, and Gina started attending our small group planning meetings. And now at this, so COVID happened and it kind of threw a wrench in our spring plans. None of the oral histories that we had planned got to happen this spring. However, her class has resumed, and it's partially online, partially in person this fall. And what's great about this fall semester is that she's expanded her class, and now it we've built in that community members from Lorain can attend or audit her class and learn themselves how to conduct oral histories, and it's not just the students. So it's a huge milestone in our project where we're becoming more independent and kind of becoming self-sustaining almost. I mean, there's a lot of work involved, but it's a huge accomplishment that we have community members who are now being educated in how to conduct oral histories, that we can kind of keep the ball rolling as we gather these stories. And now I'm going to turn it over to Maria.
Good morning. Before I begin, I just want to say that for me, this is a great opportunity, and I'm extremely proud of being part of this group. And I am extremely grateful to Barb for having the vision to think about doing this type of project. So let me begin explaining a little bit about what you're seeing here on this slide. And as a result of the larger group project, we started thinking about what else can we do in the interim while we're getting ready to potentially launch a bigger project, whether it's a physical museum or whether it's something virtually. So as a result of that, we put our brains together and we decided what a better opportunity than Hispanic Heritage Month, which we're currently in. And what you're looking at here is we prepared 2 toolkits, and one was featured or focused on grades K through 6 with different activities for the educators out there to share with their students. And then there was another one that we prepared for the middle and high school students. And what we did, and as you can see in the slide, but we wanted to make a point of them understanding, number one, what is Hispanic Heritage Month all about? How did it start? And who are the folks within our own community and outside of our community that are here from these different countries in Latin America? And as you can see, where we talk about the regions, and Barb touched on that as well, within the Hispanic or Latino community, there is much diversity within that community. And that's one of the things that sometimes makes it a little bit challenging, but it's also very interesting as well. I'm personally a product of that type of diversity. My mother is from Mexico, and my father was one of those 500 men that came to work at the U.S. Steel from Puerto Rico. So for me, again, extremely proud and excited to be on this project. The next slide is showing our Latino leaders in action. This is probably one of the first, maybe even the first meeting that we held here at the Historical Society. And we just invited all the Latino leaders in the community to come in. We had a little social hour before that. We had lots of food. It's one of the key components of doing something like this. And it was, Puerto Rican food. And they obviously came for that, and maybe a little wine as well. So anyway, what you're looking at here is the whole dynamic of what Kaitlyn presented. And we took them through the whole, you know, what are we trying to accomplish? What would they like to see come out of this? And then we went through in another separate meeting, which is that brown paper or that project with all the Post-it notes that Kaitlyn just shared with you. So overall, it was an extremely dynamic experience to watch all this in process, to see the faces and the people get excited about the project, and some of the ideas that were just, you know, flowing and coming, you know, from everybody participating. I mean, from my perspective, I think they probably could have stayed there all night. That was how exciting and how much fun it was. But again, what we're doing now, because of COVID, you know, that's the wrench that was thrown in. So we are doing all this. We're trying to do it via Zoom. We have a core group that gets together just about every 2 weeks. And then we talk about where we are, and then we invite the larger group back in. And that's what we're doing now currently with Zoom. And quite honestly, it's been a little difficult to get everybody as motivated as before. We were doing it in person, but we've kept the momentum going to some degree, and we're always looking at opportunities in terms of how do we continue to get them excited and involved in the project. So the next slide, I'm going to turn it over to Barb, and she's going to give some other comments. And again, thank you, Barb and Kaitlyn, for allowing this and especially having me here. And El Centro is very proud to be on this committee. Thank you.
Before I go into funding, which they always leave to the executive director, I just want to say what a privilege it was for Kaitlyn and I to be part of the community gatherings and to witness the excitement. You know, you read in the professional journals and you hear in your classes or in other groups how creating history and remembering your history is truly a engaging and exciting opportunity, and it builds community pride. To witness those first 2 large group meetings and to see the pride that people had, whether they were Mexican, whether they're Puerto Rican, however their ancestors came to Lorain, to see the pride in that recollection of that history. And it has been a challenge, as Maria said, to kind of get that dynamic going through Zoom, but we are doing our best. And so where are we now 1 year later? We have an idea of what we want to do, which is Kaitlyn described, is to create a virtual museum through a website and also through a digital collection of the archives and photographs. And so we need funding to do that. And so we reached out to the Hispanic Fund at our community foundation, and we did get a small grant from them to get us started. So that's been very helpful. We also decided how were we going to supplement the rest of the money. So we estimated to get to the next year, so to get to Hispanic Heritage Month 2021, we need about $10,000. We need assistance to create a website. We need assistance to host that website over time. We need the help of an intern, probably, who is trained in collecting oral histories to get those transcribed, etc. We need someone else to research what the best way is to do this digital archival collection. And so our 2 other sources of funding, we're reaching out to the Latino community, specifically asking them for funds to purchase video equipment so that when we are allowed to reconvene in person, we will be able to videotape some of the oral history interviews. And we, of course, yesterday sent in our application to the Ohio History Fund for the intern and some additional things that we need. Funding is really critical, and you need multiple sources of revenue streams in order to do this. So that always has to be the last thing that you need to take care of. But I believe that the excitement that we have and the collaboration that we've developed over this time will definitely help us be successful in securing funding.
Okay, so I'm just
Hi, let me share my screen real quick. wrong slide. Okay, hello everyone. My name is Sarah Moell and I am the Curator of Collections and Research here at the Trumbull County Historical Society, and I manage the Voices Oral History Project. Today, I have joining me Councilwoman Cheryl Saffold, who was one of our steering committee members, and she'll be talking a little bit later. But yeah, so I manage Voices of Trumbull County Oral History Project, and it preserves the stories of residents from Warren's African American community who are 70 years or older. Yeah, so let's get into it. So first, a little bit of background on Warren. So TCHS is located in Warren. It was founded in 1798 and was actually the capital of Trumbull County, which encompassed all of the Connecticut Western Reserve, so all the way from Lorain County to Mahoning County. And we are in between Cleveland and Pittsburgh, so right in the middle of the Rust Belt. Warren was a huge manufacturing and industrial city. We were a huge steel producer, especially during World War II. So a lot of people immigrated to Warren. We have huge Greek and Italian communities, and many people ended up here during the Great Migration as well because there was so much industry here. So the Voices Project began as a response to the lack of African American stories that were represented in our collection. We discovered that we had very few objects in our permanent collection, and we knew that we had to do something about that. As a community organization, we understood that we were not fulfilling our responsibility to our community by not being representative. When a community doesn't necessarily trust your organization, it is hard to go to them and ask them to donate their belongings and their family heirlooms because they might not trust you to take care of those objects. So we knew if we went out asking for stuff that we wouldn't get a good response from that. So an oral history project seemed like the perfect solution because for many people it is much easier to give an interview than to give up their belongings. And when you have an interview, it you know, you get 10 or more stories within an interview rather than an object that usually only has 1 or 2 stories associated with that. So one of the biggest challenges that we faced when we were starting this project was building trust with a community that we had never truly served before now, because we had traditionally collected and told the stories of wealthy white men, you know, who came to Trumbull County and they did all these great things. It was your typical house museum story. And when our director started in 2015, she actually began making that shift to operating as a community organization as well as a historical society, but we still had difficulty like breaking into that community that we didn't already have a rapport with. So the beginning of Voices actually began in 2017 before I came on to manage it. And we had begun by going to community and neighborhood group meetings to get the word out about the oral history project, to see if people were interested, and to just try to tell people about TCHS and what we do. But, you know, as time went on, other projects came up. The person who was managing that project left, and it kind of sat dormant for 2 years until I came on in 2019 and began the project again. Which was kind of difficult because, you know, people were like, oh, you're going to start this 2 years ago. What happened? So when we kind of restarted the project, we began by reaching out to a guy named Fred Harris. He was the former Safety and Services Director of Warren, and he is a huge figure in Warren's African American community, and he's very involved. Everybody knows Fred. He's kind of the go-to guy. He had also done quite a few oral histories himself, and he is a huge wealth of knowledge when it comes to Warren's Black history. So he was just the perfect guy to sit down and talk to. You know, we kind of talked about what we wanted to do, how we wanted to be more inclusive, and get his feedback on how to do that. We also began talking to other leaders in Warren's African American community to get their feedback as well. And to see if they wanted to also get involved in the project. And I began reaching out to oral historians outside of our community who had done projects like this before. So these conversations really led us to recognize that TCHS staff shouldn't be the ones making the decisions for this project. We needed to form a steering committee that, you know, they would be the ones to really guide this project and make the big decisions. So that's what we did. We comprised a steering committee of African American professionals and residents of the Mahoning Valley. And the steering committee, they were the ones who made all the decisions, and they guided this project to where it is today. And TCHS was there to, you know, facilitate these meetings, give them what they needed to complete the project, and make sure that the requirements of our grants were being met, because we were funded by Ohio Humanities and the Raymond John Ween Foundation. So now I'm going to turn it over to Cheryl Saffold, and she's going to discuss the role of the steering committee and the interview process that she went through. You there, Cheryl? Oh, you're on mute.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me to be part of this conference today. And you're probably wondering, how did I become involved as an elected official? Well, truthfully, I'd like to say that I am an ardent student of Black history. I am a collector of Black memorabilia. I've been collecting memorabilia for over 30 years. And my dad, Bob Saffold, who's 84 years old, he himself sold Negro history books in the 1960s, authored by J.A. Rogers, who was one of the most prominent Black historians of the 20th century. So as a result of my dad selling these historical books about Black people, I became passionate about Black history. My dad himself became a historical figure, so to speak, in our city, because he was the first African-American fireman in the city of Warren. Also, my Uncle Fred, who Sarah just mentioned, he also is passionate about Black history. And so he informed me about the project, and that's how I became involved. Now, our first steering committee meeting was held in 2019, and there were several people present at that first meeting. And so it was at that time that we discussed the various goals of the project and the purpose of the project. So it was pretty much exploratory in nature. We discussed the various African Americans in the city that we thought would make the best interviews. So we had a chalkboard and we listed, I would say, maybe 40 or 50 names of people over the age of 70. And so we contacted those people immediately to begin the interview process. Now let's keep in mind, some of these people were 90 years old and up. So our attempt was to contact those people first. And unfortunately, we had about 3 or 4 people to pass from the time that we identified them to the time that the interviews actually began. So as a result of contacting the people, I would ask them if they felt comfortable having the interviews in their house as opposed to meeting them in the library, because we have found that people feel more comfortable in their own environment. So I tugged along the video camera and we actually went to the doors and they let us in, of course, and they were very inviting, those people that I interviewed personally, which was almost 10 people. I believe I interviewed 5 women and 5 men. And so we had a release form that we asked them to sign, and I set up the camera and just let them talk. Now, we had a set of interviewing questions that did come in handy, but we wanted the interviewees to open up. So my task was not really to ask that many questions. My task was to get them to talk, and that is what they did. So we deemed the project to be very successful. Those that participated were very pleased, and we're excited about the overall project. So we are in the process now of making sure that they get a copy of the DVDs so that they themselves can document their history and pass the legacy on to their families.
Thank you, Cheryl. Another thing I want to add on about interviews, one of the decisions the steering committee made early on was that we as staff totally agree that Black people should be interviewing the interviewees. You know, if I were to go to one of our interviewees' houses, it would be more difficult for them to open up to me compared to someone who has had shared experiences as them. And we wanted them to be as comfortable as possible while they were, you know, telling us their histories and their stories. So that decision was made early on. And I think it really helped with all of the interviews, because we have wonderful interviews that, you know, they're very personal and in-depth, and it worked out really well. So we had a few events for Voices. One of the first ones we did before the interviews began was an oral history workshop for interviewers, the steering committee, and we opened it up to the public as well. So anyone who was interested in oral histories. Dr. Mark Souther of Cleveland State University gave the presentation. He has had a lot of experience in oral histories. He began the Cleveland Voices project, which includes various individual oral histories on different communities within Cleveland, like their African American community, their Japanese community, their Arabic community, among others. And he gave a really good in-depth presentation on how to get an oral history project started, how to do interviews, and it was super helpful going into the interview process. The second one that we held was in February, and we invited the steering committee and the interviewees to come join us to see the progress that we had made so far on the Voices project. We played some of the interviews that we had gathered so far, and we also invited people to bring some of their family objects with them for us to take pictures of and to scan for us to host on our online database for our collection, which we will do when it goes public in probably a year or two. But yeah, those were super successful. People seemed to really enjoy them, especially when they got to listen to some of the interviews that had been done so far. So it's really exciting to see. When we were editing the interviews, TCHS staff decided to take that on, and we had decided that we would cut the hour-long interviews into 1 minute to 5 minute clips because we were planning on putting them on a website. And we figured that would be a lot easier for researchers, educators, and people just viewing the website to search by topic rather than having to listen to an hour-long video to get to what they were looking for. So unfortunately, we had to wrap up early. We were hoping to complete 25 to 30 interviews by April of 2020, but we ended in March due to COVID. But we did get in about 17 interviews, which was very exciting. So we were still able to launch our website, which is voicesoftc.org. And we are still hoping to, you know, continuously grow the website and the interviews that we do as soon as we can do interviews again safely. But one of the end goals of our project, which we are working on right now, it was to make an educational resource for teachers. So right now we are working with Youngstown State University students to create educational packets for 4th grade all the way to college level students. And they'll focus on the different topics that are discussed in interviews, and they'll include videos, primary sources, and activities for teachers to choose from. And we're also hoping, like I said, to add to the website as time goes on to broaden all of the age groups that we cover, the topics that are covered, and we want to make it inclusive to all of Trumbull County. So yeah, that is the Voices project. Thank you.
All right, ladies. Does anybody have any questions for our speakers? Fantastic presentation. It makes me want to just go out and start our own.
Thank you.
Come on, anybody?
We would just like to, we would like
Any
to,
final thoughts or closing comments?
yeah, we just wanted to say that Sarah and I didn't align our presentations or projects at all, but we were just so impressed, Sarah, by your presentation, and we were taking notes as we went along, but we noticed so many similarities that we're just really, you know, our project just kind of came out organically. I mean, we didn't really, things just happened, and we just were so impressed by your project and our military years were doing that.
All right, we've got some questions here. What would you tell other historical organizations who want to start a project like this?
Oh, just do it.
Yeah, I would say go out to, you know, the community leaders and just kind of start having discussions with them and get their input. I mean, we wouldn't have been able to start our project if it weren't for people like Fred and Cheryl, who they were the ones who really were on the ground and promoting our project. So yeah, just start sitting down with your community members.
I would just like to also add that we have already reached out to the African American community, but as was said in Sarah and Cheryl's comments, a lot of it is really building the trust with the community that what the Historical Society is trying to do is really beneficial, because there hasn't always been that relationship with communities of color. And so we actually, the African American group in Lorain is actually starting this process themselves. They're working together to do it. We've reached out to some elders in the community to try to have something work with them to follow a similar format. The difficulty in Lorain is that the Latino community has either El Centro as a go-to organization or Sacred Heart Parish as a go-to organization. African American community does not have cohesiveness, so it might be a little bit more difficult, but we're gonna start plugging along. They've already been meeting, and I will join them this Wednesday and see where we're ready to go from there.
Do you think you'll try virtual interviews in the future?
Yeah,
For us personally,
professors at, the professors at Oberlin College, they are proceeding with online interviews for the fall. Their students aren't allowed to meet with anyone in person, so that's where we're going to see how it goes.
For us, we probably won't, since a lot of our interviewees are at least right now, they're a lot older. I think it's easier for them to just have a sit-down conversation with someone else rather than talking to a computer. Yeah, so for now, that's not in the plan.
Is there a way to get an outline of the steps you took for each project?
Could you repeat that? Sorry.
Asking for an outline of the steps you took for each project.
Yes, if I may add, hi, it's Maria. We don't have a process outlined or detailed, as you heard in our presentation. It's just kind of evolved as a result of what we were hearing from the community. But I think the best process or an outline is this whole presentation, because you're actually seeing what we did on our side and also seeing what Sarah did. So I think that in itself will give you an idea in terms of, you know, what process. We didn't have a formal process, but this will give you some idea in terms of, you know, how to get started. But as Barb said, I think the key thing is finding a member of the community that is, you know, will buy into this right away. And that's the person that's going to get you connected and through their network, and also to help you build that trust within the community.
What was your biggest challenge for the project?
COVID. COVID, definitely.
Great answer.
Yeah, and right now the biggest challenge is just getting the group, motivated again as they were in the beginning. So we're working on that. And we hope.
For us, I think it was just kind of getting the word out about TCHS. Building that trust is hard, but when you have, people like Cheryl and like Fred who are so involved, it's a little easier to kind of bridge that gap. But yeah, I think getting our initial kind of group together to get the project started was one of the challenges for us to just kind of get going.
Mm-hmm.
Have you identified additional areas in your collections where you might pursue a project like this in the future?
Yeah, for us, we next would like to get into the large immigrant communities here. We have a huge Greek community and an Italian community, and we really don't have too much in our collection from them either. So that's where our project is going to go next.
And ours will be going towards the African American community.
Anything else you could add on strategies for identifying and reaching out to the right community members would be helpful. That's where a lot of groups have trouble.
Kind of hinted at this in the beginning when it takes time to build trust, and you have to kind of establish yourself as a community organization that is welcoming to everyone, and that really takes time. And then Maria added by just saying, find an individual or a small group of people that trust the organization to be authentic in collecting this history, and know that this history will be treasured just as everyone else's history is treasured and reported accurately. I think it was interesting to me, but I agree with it, that the Voices of Trumbull County group said that African Americans should interview each other. People know their history will be reported accurately. And I think that something that has stuck with me, Toni Morrison is a native of Lorain, and there was a film about her life, The Pieces I Am. And one of the things that she said in the film was she wanted her work to be seen without the white man's gaze. And as I listen to that and have thought about that comment, I think that's so important when we are collecting the stories of women, people of color, any underrepresented group, any group that's not white male. We have to be very careful that that story is told without that layer of interpretation and told authentically. And so having African Americans interview one another is a way to do it, and that's the way to do it. And however it works in your group, it's just really important to allow the story to be told authentically.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of a sister question to that. What changed at your organizations to make all this happen? Because a lot of organizations focus on settlers in the 19th century and people who only look one way.
Well, I would say that the project that we have we've been building up to this project for several years. Barb will tell the story about when she first joined at the Historical Society, how underrepresented people of color were in any representation in our exhibits, in our archives, and just making a dedicated effort to be more inclusive, more aware, to be more, just to better represent. Lorain is called the International City. And if you're not embracing all nationalities, and are you really being an international city? Are we really being an international museum? So I'd say this, if you're going straight from being just jump to this project, I mean, that's a huge step. So it does take time to build relationships with the community. We had Hispanic Heritage Month exhibits in the past. We had a relationship with El Centro, so we didn't just go straight in. Our first meeting with El Centro, our first interaction wasn't for this project. So I think knowing that you got to be in it for the long game and that it doesn't happen overnight. It's important to know.
Yeah, for us, our director started in 2015, and she began making that shift to working as a community organization as well as a historical society. And that's when, a lot of changes started for us, because she, really going through the collection, realizing it's not inclusive, and she started meeting with more community members throughout time. And then, the Voices Project kind of had its beginning in 2017, and then eventually started in 2019. So it is a process to actually get projects like this going. But yeah.
How do you balance funding constraints while also working with community members? We struggle with building trust because we must also fund these projects, though they are able and successful grant writers. It seems suspect to many community members that there's money involved. So how do you balance your funding constraints while working with community members? Or do you have this issue in your communities?
For us, we were grant funded through Ohio Humanities and then the Raymond John Ween Foundation in Warren. So we didn't have too many budget constraints when starting the project. We were able to give stipends to our interviewers and interviewees for this first round. So we didn't have too many issues with that. I don't know if Lorain did or not.
We did. So I would say that our commitment on the part of Oberlin College, El Centro, and Lorain Historical Society has been the commitment of staff time, which we just did because it was the right thing to do. But as I believe you heard in my portion at the end, that once we had a project in mind, we knew we needed to get funding to hire an intern to develop the website. But it's really been the contributed services of the people that have been involved in the core committee. And, just El Centro footing the bill for the food. I mean, those folks ate a lot. they ate in the beginning and they came back at the end because that Puerto Rican pork is really good. And the wine and just all the things that it costs money, but that helped create the engagement, that helped create the celebration, the bringing everybody together. That was critical. And it's less expensive with COVID because we don't have those costs, but those are just some of the things that the organizations absorbed because of their commitment to the project. But now that we want an end result and we want an exhibit in 2021, that's where we're going to get costs. And so we went local here. We're going to ask the community. And then, we have, as I said, the grant to the Ohio History Fund, so.
All right, any other questions? Andy Verhoff of the Ohio State Historic Preservation Office now shared that it seems that honestly you want to authentically live your organization's mission and do the history of your entire community, and that's what's great about these projects. There's a similar project in Marion County Historical Society, Marion Voices, at marionvoices.org. Any other final thoughts or comments, questions? All right, well, thank you everyone for joining us today, and thank you to our panelists. Excellent job and very encouraging for all of us to go out and start our own projects. And this session, along with all the other ones for the conference, will be available online within the next couple weeks. So stay tuned for emails and information on that. Thank you for joining us today.